if you don't like DSA, it is possible for the establishment wings of the party to offer a different vision. Like, they could avail themselves of selling something that would solve the problems and speaking to the anger people feel. The fact that they have instead chosen to punch left or to, blame the young people who want these wild and crazy things, like, make an argument.
It is on.
Hi, everyone. Progressive candidates are toppling Democratic incumbents, and it could reshape the 2026 midterms. Today, I'm joined by Amanda Littman, Adam Gentleson, and Roshni Nedungadi to break down what's driving this political shift and what it means for the future of the Democratic Party and our country as a whole. Don't go anywhere. Adam, Amanda, and Roshni, thank you for coming on.
Great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
So there's been a lot of ink spilled on the rise of these insurgent candidates in the Democratic Party. I'd love for each of you, what is the lens through which you're viewing this divide? Is it moderate versus centrist, insider versus outsider, young versus old? Why don't we start with you, Adam, then Amanda, then Roshni?
I mean, there's definitely an ideological component to it, right? You can't avoid that. I mean, the platforms that a lot of these insurgent candidates are running on are, very clear. They often have a lot in common, things like Medicare for all. The war in Gaza is a huge issue driving a lot of this. But I think you also, if you were doing all those positions, but didn't have the outsider versus insider dynamic, they wouldn't be getting the traction they're getting. So I think it's a combination of those two things. They happen to be young. They are definitely outsiders, but they're also a lot of the passion behind them, what's driving the movement, does have these strong ideological components to it as well.
Okay, Amanda?
So Run for Something, the organization I run, had nearly 100,000 people sign up to run for office in the last 18 months. That's more than we had in the entirety of Trump's first term. And the thing that we heard this time around that was different than Trump 1.0 was very specific frustration with the Democratic Party, with this sense that, like, my leaders are not fighting for me. They're not showing up for me. They don't care about me. They haven't delivered for me. I am not going to wait my turn. I'm not going to get to the back of the line. I am done being told to just, be patient. So when I look at these insurgent candidates, in congressional levels, we're seeing them on the state ledge levels, on the municipal levels, it is a deep frustration with the status quo. And I do think it is generational in many ways. It's not a coincidence that so many of them are millennials and Gen Z leaders, but it's not even outsider so much as anti-return to normal and anti-establishment as so much as the establishment is the status quo.
Roshni?
Yeah, very much agree with what Amanda was saying. And I'm a partner at HIT Strategies, which is a full-scale public opinion research firm. We do expansive voter population research, but we also focus in on audiences that are typically underrepresented in voter research. So people of color, young voters, women, LGBTQ, and all of the intersections of those voters. And they really make up the core of the Democratic Party, and I feel like should be the leaders on what the Democratic Party positions are. And exactly like Amanda said, over the last few years, we've been hearing them say they are fed up with the Democratic Party. They don't see elected leaders as fighting for them. They don't believe that the systems are advocating for them. And they believe that the Democratic candidates are taking their votes for granted. And so all of this is creating an environment for them that is opening a lane for a more progressive insurgent left who are more responsive to the issues of the day to step in and fill the gap that they feel is lacking in their candidates.
Cicely, even though, Adam, you mentioned Gaza, you didn't mention policies as much as the vibe, right? I guess the feeling that people aren't representing them on policies. Is that correct?
That's right, but I really think you can't understate how important the Gaza conflict is to a lot of this. I really think it's...
I have two sons, 20, 21 and 25. I know.
It's hugely important. And I think that's...
Yeah.
Because, there are young anti-establishment candidates running in other races who sort of don't fall into this category of left-wing insurgents. People like Bobby Polito, who's running in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, Bob Brooks, who's running in Pennsylvania's 7th District. They're outsiders. They're anti-establishment too. But I think what's a differentiator between them and this sort of insurgent left is those ideological components. And there's some policy overlap with them as well. But I think it's, you couldn't be included in this left-wing insurgency that is largely driven by the DSA and others if you had a centrist position on on the Israeli conflict, or if you were unwilling to call it a genocide. And I think that's a big differentiator.
Right, right. I would say that. I just have noticed from my children, two of whom have very different political views. Interestingly, they do come together on the same idea of focus on the Democrats. They don't like Trump, that's for sure. And none of you mentioned not liking Trump as part, correct, Amanda?
It's the water people are swimming in. It's not
Right.
the bait that's hooking them. Because you have to remember, for this generation of leaders, this new generation of leaders in particular, it's always been Trump. Like,
Hmm.
it has been the Trump era since they came into political awareness. For most of
Hmm.
them, at least especially if you're Gen Z, the first election you voted on, Trump was on the ballot.
What do you think, Roshni?
Yeah, I mean, he is wildly unpopular, especially among the Democratic base. And when we're in focus groups with a lot of voters and trying to talk about all of the bad things that Trump has been doing, they
Hmm.
are very well aware of what is going on in Trump's
Hmm.
administration. They hear it from their social media, they hear it from the news, they hear it from people in their community. We're not giving them new information when we talk about Trump's
Hmm.
bad policies and bad decisions. So it's very much the context that they're operating under already.
Already, and they just want someone to do something about it. I think
Exactly.
the correct. So let's talk about some of the candidates, speaking of doing something about it, in races that represent what we're talking about here. Progressives saw two big wins in Colorado this month in the governor's race. State Attorney General Phil Weiser beat Democratic Senator Michael Bennet, and Democratic Socialist Maylot Quiros unseated Democratic Representative Diana DeGette, who'd held the Denver seat, for almost 30 years. Adam, Colorado is a blue state, but not a bright blue state. Talk about the dynamics of these races in particular, and how the insurgents were able to oust these incumbents.
Yeah, it's ironic because if you know Michael Bennett, as I have had the privilege of getting to know him a little bit over the years, this guy was, very against the current Democratic leadership. He had lots of problems with Chuck Schumer. He was a big critic, both in private and in public. But I think it wasn't part of his public identity in a major way, and that is ultimately what really sort of did him in this race, because he was seen as a DC insider. Phil Weiser, who beat him, isn't exactly a left-wing progressive. This definitely sort of is evidence for the idea that this is a lot more about outsider versus insider, because Phil Weiser, doesn't adopt Medicare for all as one of his policy positions. He actually is in line with us at Searchlight on free primary care for all. But then on the House race side, you kind of had the opposite dynamic, where Diana DeGette is a co-sponsor of Medicare for All, right? A big advocate for it, and has been for a long time, but she didn't have as far left a position on Israel and Gaza, and that was part of the avenue that Malat Quiros and others used against her. Also, the fact that she's taking corporate money and some of these other aspects that were ultimately what did her in. So it's a mix of things, and there are different things in different races, but some combination of outsider versus insider and some of these deep ideological issues that are driving this. When those things come together, incumbents really got to watch out, because they could really be in trouble.
Right. Now, in New York, three progressives, backed by a New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's ousted House incumbents. Two of those candidates are also members of the Democratic Socialists of America. House Speaker Hakeem Jeffries was not pleased with Mamdani's decision to endorse these candidates. Amanda, what lessons do mainstream Democrats still need to learn about what's resonating with voters right now? And certainly the mayor is, for certain.
What I thought was so interesting about those races, Claire Valdez and Daria Lisa Chevalier, they got the attention for their comments on Gaza, and I think that speaks to sort of like their moral character. Their campaigns were really focused on like cost of living issues. It was about housing, it was about childcare, it was about infrastructure. Like, the things that they were knocking doors about were the same things that Mamdani was talking about in his campaign. It was, you have problems, we have solutions, and the current leadership has not delivered them. I mean, in many ways, it speaks to kind of what Trump was getting at so long ago, which is like, this swamp is not serving you. I'm going to solve all your problems. I can fix it. This new class of Democratic leaders, and DSA or not, they are saying, we hear you. We hear how broken you feel everything is, how much it feels like the system is not working for you. I don't care even if you're aligned with them or not in terms of like policies. These folks in power have not solved it. They just
Right.
haven't. We've given them their chance. They've been in office in some cases as long as you've been alive. Throw them out. Give us a new
Right.
try.
Now, Roshni, Republicans are already trying to tie Democrats to Mamdani and these other DSA candidates. I've never heard the word communism so much since I studied in school. But for young voters and voters of color, how potent an attack line is that?
I actually think that he is very popular nationally and has only
Yeah,
grown in
I would
popularity
agree. Yeah.
since he's been elected.
Hmm.
And so his ideas and the policies that he is pushing and the candidates that are pushing these ideas and policies are very, very popular nationally. And so I don't think he is as effective of a boogeyman for Republicans because people are seeing him make real change in New York City and
Hmm.
seeing the voters of New York City be really appreciative of the work that he's doing.
Why are they doing it then? They must have there must be some poll they're dragging out, or is it a knee jerk, say communist and hope it works?
I think the label of communism and socialism still has not caught up to Mamdani himself. I think
Hmm.
voters are still unwilling to vote for a candidate that is explicitly socialist. And so the label is a potent attack. However, using him in addition to the label, I feel like
Doesn't work.
cancel each other out.
Adam, how do you look at that? And then
I
Amanda.
look, regardless of what you thought about Mamdani coming in, I think purely as a sort of game appreciates game, perspective as a political, observer, no one's doing it better than he is right now. I mean, he's really doing an incredible job. And I think that if you're trying to sort of draw lessons from it, it's his energy. Yesterday he was watching the World Cup games at Rikers Island. I mean, this guy is everywhere, and everything he's doing is conveying that he sees all of New York. His love for the city is infectious, but he's also been very pragmatic in his governing choices so far, right? I mean, he sort of distanced himself from his previous comments about defunding the police. He embraced Jess Tisch, the New York City police commissioner, and kept her on, even though a lot of folks on the left wanted him to fire her. And he embraced a lot of sort of the critics on the sort of abundance, YIMBY movement who have a, sort of deregulatory approach to housing and the idea is you need to build more to lower prices. He's really shifted in their direction and embraced a lot of their ideas. So part of what he's doing well, a lot of it's his energy, his youth, his enthusiasm, his good looks, his charm, all that comes through. But he's also governing in a smart and pragmatic way. And I think those two things together, the last point I'd make is that crime is way down. Crime is way down. He's not dealing with huge influxes of immigrants being shipped up from Texas. And I think some of the fundamental conditions for his affordability message to break through are those sorts of things of having, New Yorkers feeling like they have basic security in their homes, in their neighborhood, in their everyday lives. That really clears the way for that
Right.
focus on affordability and day-to-day life improvements.
Amanda?
I would add one other thing, which is that he helps the credibility gap that Democrats have right now. Within 8 days of taking office, he did that press conference where he announced the expansion of 3K and beginning a pilot program for 2K towards universal childcare in the city. He's, working towards fast and free buses. He is frozen the rent. Whether you maybe liked those policies or not, which especially as a parent of toddlers, love the universal childcare, it is really proof that you can keep your promises. And I think one of the challenges the Democratic Party has right now is even if you promise the moon, voters don't believe we'll deliver it. They don't believe we will do what we say. So I honestly think making him the face of the party in many ways as someone who promises to do big things and then actually gets them done helps close that credibility gap, which we're going to have a big problem with going into 2028 because all of these people running for Congress right now, they're promising big legislation. They're
Right.
not going to be able to govern until Trump
Mhm.
is no longer president.
That's
So
correct. That is
it's one
absolutely
of the
correct.
challenges of
Yeah.
this moment.
Support for this show comes from Built. There's no way around it. Housing is expensive. Rent, mortgage, it doesn't matter which one you're paying. Nobody likes letting that big chunk of change go every month. Built was created to help ease the sting. Becoming a Built member means earning points on every housing payment, no matter where you live. Redeem Built points for flights, hotels, Lyft rides, Amazon.com purchases, future housing payments, and more. On top of that, you can access their agentic neighborhood concierge. It's basically an assistant in the Built app that connects to both your home and over 50,000 merchant partners. It can pay your rent, make dinner reservations, book fitness classes, schedule a Lyft ride, and more. It helps you out while automatically applying your member benefits along the way. Built is not just for renters anymore. It works for mortgages now as well. When your housing payment is one of your biggest monthly expenses, you might as well earn points on it. Download the Built app and join membership for where you live at joinbuilt.com/Kara. That's joinbilt.com/Kara, Kara. Use our link so they know we sent you. So every episode we get a question from an outside expert. Here's yours.
Hi. I'm Liz Smith, and I'm a Democratic strategist and advisor to majority Democrats in the bench. My question for you is, since 2024, we have seen Democratic voters embrace a lot of anti-establishment candidates and insurgent candidates and all of the energy around them. But of course, we've seen the pitfalls with this, with the main Senate race. So my question for you is, how do Democrats harness that energy? And given your preferences, what do you think the basic vetting standards or thresholds should be for outsider candidates going forward so we avoid another Plattner type situation?
Adam, Amanda, and then Roshni.
Yeah, I think this is where you can sort of envision a big tent, right? This is where big tentism, which is sort of a core principle for us at the Searchlight Institute, really comes through, which is like, welcome DSA into the party. But for folks who are running in tougher races, they should have the anti-establishment vibe. They should criticize Democratic leadership because it very much deserves to be criticized. But then, don't take some of these far left positions that are going to be hard to defend in swing states and purple states. Maine is still pretty much a blue state. Kamala Harris won it by, I think, 7 points. So Plattner could have probably gotten away with some of those left-wing positions, if he hadn't had the scandals. And then, yeah, I think vetting people properly is a good idea. And there were signs, I supported, I think a lot of us have, it's worth doing some introspection. I supported him probably long past when there were a lot of red flags that should have signaled where this was going. We knew the circumstantial information about him having this long, decades-long struggles with PTSD and a penchant for violence and, disrespectful and dismissive attitudes towards sexual assault. There were signs, right? And so it wasn't a shock. So, the lack of vetting was bad. And then I think, ignoring a lot of these signs was also a mistake in retrospect. But fortunately, we'll hopefully get a good candidate in that race soon and beat Susan Collins.
Right. Amanda?
So Run for Something over the last 10 years has endorsed more than 4,000 candidates. We do deep vetting on each one. We do background checks. We do social media scrubs. We do local operatives who gut check us and tell us the context. We've had to rescind endorsements less than 10 times in 10 years. It is possible to run a candidate recruitment program at scale that brings in people with integrity and also strong character. Now, to Adam's point about the Big Tent, the way we have structured this is that we are tight on values and flexible on policy, knowing that those values are going to show up differently in a city council race in New York than they might in a school board race in Alaska. That's how we were able to elect like a DSA person to the Atlanta City Council, but also a former Republican who left the party after January 6th, so was there all the way through Trump won, in rural Pennsylvania, who's now running for State House, Andrew Harbaugh. It is possible. I do think you have to operate not as a kingmaker. I think one of the challenges that happened with Plattner is they were doing, Mad Lib style candidate recruitment. We are looking for X kind of occupation, an X demographic with X kind of political engagement, because that's who we think can win. You cannot do top-down kingmaking. We have learned this. Voters smell the bullshit. They don't like it. And it inevitably backfires, as we saw in Maine. We cannot puppet master candidates anymore if we ever could. What we have to do is empower people who say, you know what, I think I can see myself in leadership, and then give them the tools to succeed, and do that in as wide as a way as we can. Like, throw the doors open to as many people as possible. If we try to manufacture people, we'll get either inauthentic, unvetted, or the combination of the two that voters will reject.
Right. Or something blows up in that case. Roshni?
I think that this is an opportunity for us. I mean, we saw what happened to the Republican Party when the Tea Party took over. We have those lessons to learn. We are experiencing the same groundswell of anger from our base, anger and frustration. We have the opportunity now to listen to that and amend the way that we are running candidates and promoting policy and just treating our voters. And so I think we just have to stop digging in our heels and actually listen to the voters and do hard things in order to prevent candidate disaster.
Candidate disaster can come in many forms, though, correct? I mean, presumably this one wasn't vetted, and he seemed to be a king made, essentially, or plucked out of, rather than he was interested in doing it in the first place.
And I think the flip to that is also worth noting, which was that he was up in opposition to also someone who was not, if plucked from obscurity, chosen for this race. Like Schumer et al. Recruited Janet Mills, who did not want to run. And you can tell because she did not then throw herself into this opening now, did not really want to be campaigning, was deeply unpopular as governor, and was so obviously not the right fit for an anti-establishment, anti-gerontocratic moment. People did not want the 78-year-old governor to be like dragged out of retirement to run for office. And that I think is what made so much of the last couple of months in Maine so frustrating, is that it actually didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be Plattner versus Mills, and then ultimately the outcome against Collins. There was a really interesting, diverse field of folks running for governor. Some of them could have run for Senate, as we're now seeing. There's a pretty exciting bench in Maine that we're starting to build up. Like,
Mhm.
there are villains on nearly every side of this story.
Right,
And I
right.
think it is worth
Yeah, it is a
pointing
good
to
point.
that as we go.
Yes, absolutely. Schumer did try to kingmake there and made a mistake there. The next big test will be Michigan Senate primary. Progressive Abdul El Said is challenging Representative Haley Stevens, a third candidate who is trying to strike the middle ground between the two. Michigan Senator Mallory McMorrow dropped out. She just never caught on. Democrats have to hold onto the seat if they want any chance of taking back the Senate, but for Progressive, it's their last chance to show one of their Senate candidates can win in a purple state. It would be a big win if he won. The primary is August 4th. What are you all watching right now? Roshni, you start, and then Amanda, then Adam.
Yeah, I've been looking at the polling. It's going back and forth, but it seems like he's gaining a lot of momentum.
Uh-huh.
He is running a similar playbook as Mamdani in New York City. He is money back in your pockets, money out of, hold corporations accountable and take corporate money out of politics, Medicare for all, um, reducing cost of living for voters, and reducing that economic crunch that voters are feeling. And he's very consistently on message with those policy points. And voters are really resonating with that message in Michigan.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Amanda?
I'm looking at the spending discrepancy. They have spent, I think, over $50 million on behalf of Haley Stevens. She is outspending El Sayed, I believe, 10-1 at this point. If that's how much you have to spend to get her over the finish line in the primary, is there going to be the enthusiasm for her in the general? If she wins this, I don't know. And I'm keeping an eye on that of like, how can you, again, can you king make in a state
Mm-hmm.
like this?
Mm-hmm. Adam?
I'm looking at whether El Said decides to make some of the pragmatic choices in the way that Mamdani has in order to appeal to a broader audience as we approach the general election. Because, he was pressed on a CNN interview recently on his previous comments supporting defund the police, and he stood by them. And I thought that was unfortunate. There are real electability concerns, but it's not about, anything about him as a person. It's about some of these positions that he's taken that are going to be difficult to defend in a Michigan general election race. Now, on the other hand, similar to the dynamic in Maine, I'm no big fan of Haley Stevens either. I don't think she's been a particularly compelling candidate. There's not a really strong electability argument for her either because her past performance, her numbers are okay, but they're not amazing. So it's another one of these dynamics where the choice is difficult. El Sayed is probably a better political athlete. He's very talented. He's great on social media. But he has taken some positions that unless he starts making some pragmatic choices, and there's still time left for him to do so, I do think those things are going to be liabilities in a general election.
Do either of you think that? Amanda, do you think that, or Roshni?
I think he has some liabilities. I go back and forth a little bit because on the one hand, like if he genuinely does believe we should defund the police, I do think there's or whatever statement he's saying, like there is some value in really saying what you believe.
Right.
Even
right.
if he knows that it's not a practical position to take. And I think part of that is it can signal to people that they can trust you. So, I think this is where you get into some tension here of, do you contort your policies for an
center.
electorate or do you still true to what you value? Like, it's a tough call. And I think you have to be a really talented communicator to be able to do it.
Well, Mamdani just 100% reversed himself on, apologizing to the New York City police officers and just distanced himself from defund the police. And as we've talked about here, he's wildly popular and doing a great job. So I think it's possible to do it with
he's already mayor, though.
He's already mayor. But, listen, Woke One was crazy. Everybody said a lot of stuff that they probably didn't, got caught up in the moment. I think there's also a level of forgiveness of saying, hey, listen, we all got a little carried away there. And with the benefit of hindsight, I've decided to sort of reevaluate those things. People don't mind people changing their mind if they're open and honest about their reasoning there.
Yeah, I think it comes to whether he can articulate how he got to a new place. And I think Mamdani is able to do it in part because he has the trust of voters. I don't say he has not earned that yet. I think he's still got a little bit of work to do there.
Are people allowed to change their mind even if it's not genuine necessarily?
I think if it's a genuine change, then yes, they are allowed. Voters really, really value authenticity in candidates. And to voters, that means staying true to your beliefs. And so I think if you can explain to voters, here's why I believed in defund the police, and here is why I have now changed my mind, that's not just, I saw poll numbers that say it's unpopular, and so now I'm going to change my mind on it. Or my big corporate donors have told me this is not a popular position for me to hold, so now I'm going to flip flop on it. If they can display that level of authenticity, I think it's totally appropriate to change your mind.
All right, let's talk about what's driving the rise of these insurgent candidates. Amanda, like you mentioned, Run for Something saw a record number of people sign up to run for office after the 2024 election, mainly because they were angry at the Democratic Party. Talk about more specific ways these people felt the party was failing them and how it's driving where we are. I mean, they're angry is one thing, but particularly, what's the specific thing?
When I look back at 25 and 26, the biggest moments we saw for candidate recruitment were first the first big wave of Doge firings. So there's frustration with the federal government and like how could you let people lose their jobs? And a lot of it was laid off federal workers who had public service experience and wanted to run in a different way. The second was Schumer's failure to resolve things during the first shutdown fight. They were pissed. They're like, how can you hand off our government to this guy? I thought we said that this was the end of democracy. If this is actually an existential crisis, why are you playing games with him? The third big moment was Mamdani's win. Like after Mamdani won in June of last year, we had 10,000 people sign up in those 2 weeks. I think part of that was, his joy, the inspiration, but also this idea that the establishment is not unbeatable. They just go unchallenged. The last big one was right after the elections in the fall, when you see people like, yes, Mamdani, but also Spanberger, Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, just like, oh yeah, people can do this. Good people can run and good people can win. Now, I will say the thing that I have come back to a bunch over the last year is how much housing comes up in these conversations. And in particular, young people feeling like Democrats have not done enough to make it possible to buy a home. They have not done enough for renters. And it is, I think, part of a larger sense that young people do not have agency over their lives. They don't have an ability to choose where they live, where they work, how they live, if they can start a family. Housing is the number one issue people are talking about when they talk about running for office. And I think it's connected to how young voters are feeling.
That's a very good point. The political strategist now, James Carville, recently unloaded on these Democratic socialists and progressive candidates trying to challenge incumbents. He said they were, quote, so fucking stupid, I don't know what to say about it. Adam, you mentioned the need for a Big Ten approach. Do you care what Carville has to say about this? I mean, he was quite, speaking of gerontocracy, to what extent is he emblematic of the generational divide that's animating some of these candidates?
I think he's very emblematic of the generational divide, and I think he's wrong on this. I think we look, there was a picture on Twitter the other day of a DSA meeting, right? And there were two things that I took away from it. And one was that half the people in the room were wearing face masks, right? And so in July of 2026, that is an indication that a lot of these people, are not representative of the broader American public, right? But the other thing that was equally important, if not more important, was that the room was packed. And you had, 50 or so people, deeply committed to the civic process, who care deeply about issues, who are debating, Robert's Rules of Order and all these sort of, arcane procedures that, the DNC should be extremely jealous of that level of commitment and energy and organization, right? And so, we may not agree on every issue, but that passion and that commitment has a place in our big tent, and it must have a place in our big tent. And we can all disagree on issues and say what we believe and where we draw lines and distinguish ourselves, and what's right for New York City is not right for Texas. But that energy is incredibly valuable, and we would be very dumb as a party to try to run it out of the party.
Why are people like him doing that then?
It threatens people like his power. I mean, the institutions will always protect himself. Carville and many other of the older leaders like him are creatures of these institutions. They have built them from the ground up. They are scared. When we talk about the leaders who got us into this mess will not be the ones to get us out of it, we also mean people like him. This is not to say he did not do some good things in his service, but that dude does not understand what it's like to be a 20 or 30-something in the United States right now. He does not understand why people are angry. He and so many others of his sort of generation of leaders, both literally and figuratively, are so removed from where people are. And I would just posit, if you don't like DSA, it is possible for the establishment wings of the party or the old guard, such as it is, to offer a different vision. Like, they could avail themselves of selling something that would solve the problems and speaking to the anger people feel. The fact that they have instead chosen to punch left or to,
Yeah.
blame the young people who want these wild and crazy things, like, make
Yeah.
an argument.
I would add that I think the older generation too often minimizes the intelligence of young voters. And because a lot of young voters get their information on social media or from their friends, assume that it's not uh, as good of information as they're getting in newspapers or on cable TV. And at least what we're seeing in our research and talking to young folks, that could not be farther from the truth. They're so well informed on the
I
issues.
would
They
agree.
really understand what's going on.
Hmm.
They are just saying consistently over and over again, they're fed up with the system. And so I
Right.
think it's a really wrong take.
Right. I do. Again, I think of my sons. They're very well informed. They just don't agree with him. That's,
Right.
you know what I mean? And it's really hard because one of the things that when people are complaining about Mamdani winning, I said, you tell young people to be involved and to vote. And when they do it, you tell them their vote is stupid. Like, I don't
Mhm.
understand. Like, they're doing what you said and you just don't like their choice, which is very different. I also had political journalist Stead Herndon on the show a few months ago. He talked about how voters now don't fit into neat ideological boxes. I think that's another truism. And it's more important for candidates to be clearly articulate in their values than it is to fit neatly into an ideological box. First, Roshni, how does that square with what you're seeing in the research with young and minority voters who've been moving away from the Democratic Party? And
Yeah.
what animates them now?
I think we've heard a lot about young men, particularly young men of color, over the last few election cycles, moving further away from the Democratic Party or voting more for Republicans. And so we've undertaken a lot of research over the last couple of years with our partners at Third Way and at Black Men Vote to dig into what's going on there, what is leading to these votes. And now that we're seeing these young men slowly move back towards the Democratic Party, what is driving that as well. And what we found a lot is young men, young people are severely economically strained. They heard Democrats in 2024 say the economy is fine, it's getting better, we don't have to worry about it. And so they were looking for candidates in that time, Trump, who were making arguments that identified the pain that they were experiencing and found some sort of solution for it. Now
Now
they
they're
have
hearing Trump say that. Now they're hearing
now they have noticed that he is not going to help them at all. He's making their lives a lot worse. And so they're looking for an alternative. And I think that's where some of these insurgent candidates too have come in. But I think an important point there is to note that at no point, even while they were voting for Trump, did these young men, particularly young men of color, identify as MAGA or Republican. They're still overwhelmingly progressive or Democratic or moderate. They just needed a place to land in the last election because they didn't feel like they had a home in the Democratic Party. And so I think what we're seeing is more and more young people are not identifying cleanly with parties in the way that they have in the
No, they are.
past. And so we have to be a little bit more flexible with our messaging and our policy positions.
Now, Adam, you had some examples of what Roshni was talking about in your book. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that the overarching frame here is that the defining feature of the American people is their ideological heterodoxy, right? The American voters are not rigidly ideological. And so they don't take all their positions from the left or the right. They mix things from column A and column B. And so, when you've seen candidates who've been successful, especially in resisting attacks as being socialist or Republican smears, it's because they mix those positions together and convey this heterodoxy that connects with the American people and makes people think, oh, when you face a tough decision, you're going to be an independent thinker. You're a different kind of Democrat. You're going to think like me. And so, you look around the country now, the candidates who are succeeding in some of these redder areas, people like James Tallarico, are mixing in, non-traditional Democratic positions with their sort of liberal values. So Tallarico, running in Texas, is talking about how valuable the oil and gas industry is to the Texas economy. It supports, hundreds of thousands of working class jobs, hundreds of thousands of working class Hispanic men, are employed by the oil and gas industry. And so, for a candidate like him, who clearly is deeply committed to liberal values, if you're going to win in a state like Texas, you got to mix in some of those heterodox positions. And that's part of why I think we're seeing him succeed.
So, I mean, one of the things that's really isn't usually a top concern for voters, but like we talked about, support for Israel and taking money from AIPAC is still really dividing Democrats. You just saw this vote in the House, which was unprecedented, I think. Even if it's not voters' top concern like the economy, talk about the role the issue of support of Israel is playing now on the campaign trail.
I think it's twofold. One is that it's a moral litmus test, especially for young voters, but even for older voters too, is sense that can you call a spade a spade? Can you call what we are seeing in Gaza a genocide, as it so clearly is? Can you do you see the atrocity and can you name it? And I think for younger voters in particular, that kind of moral clarity is necessary. The second is the way that AIPAC is trying to buy elections speaks to the larger problem of money in politics. For people feeling like their voice can be drowned out by amount of money that feels undemocratic and unfair. And I think AIPAC has become the boogeyman for that, but they are not alone here. We're seeing that from crypto. We're seeing that from tech. We're seeing
I
that
think Elon
from
Musk has $90 million in right now.
the gambling. But I think the combination of the moral clarity around the issue and the money being spent that is so clearly removed from where the American people are, which I think is also the challenge here.
We're just a few months out from the midterms. The Democrats are going to have to figure out how to navigate these divides in real time if they want to retake power in Congress. Most people feel they have a lock on the House. We'll see. Senate is in play. I think that's probably the fairest way to say it. But the big fear is that Democrats are facing a moment like the Republicans did in 2010 and 2012 during the Tea Party wave when unqualified or just bad candidates cost them a Senate majority, although 2010 was still a wave election for Republicans, let's be clear. And when you're looking at how can Democrats avoid that same fate between now and November, although I think the candidate quality is pretty high from what looking around the country.
Yeah, I mean, I lived through those elections, candidates like Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, who, famously had to run an ad saying, "I'm not a witch,"
Yes.
losing it, which should have been a winnable seat for Republicans because she beat
Being a
Mike
witch
Castle.
today might win you a seat, but go ahead.
That's true. Times change. She should,
Yeah.
hey, she should make another run.
Yeah.
So we don't have anybody that's that bad in terms of candidate quality. But I think, this is why we really got to hone in on questions of electability, where I think anybody who's currently, we only have a few primaries left. And I really genuinely believe that any of the major candidates in any of these primaries we have left on the Senate side can win, right? Especially in an environment that is really strong up for us on the fundamentals. People are deeply upset about Trump. They're really angry. They hate the economy. All that makes for a good midterm for Democrats. We just have to get really smart and not let these people need to be more focused on winning an election than winning an argument. And, if Abdul El-Sayed is the nominee, his job is to beat Mike Rogers, the Republican, right? And put that first above everything else. Even if it means conceding some issues on factional purity, you got to focus on winning. It would be not in his interest or the interest of his faction for him to lose. So, everybody's just got to get really smart as we turn into general election season and focus on winning. And I think we don't have any candidates who are incapable of doing that as long as they, put beating the Republican over winning these factional arguments.
Amanda, does money play as big a role? Do you think there is enormous? I mean, Ken Griffin, Elon, the tech people are putting a lot in. Trump has some slush fund. Is that going to make a difference? It didn't make a difference in Wisconsin when Elon tried to get those judges put in, and it didn't make a difference for Tom Steyer in California, for example.
I think money matters to the extent that candidates and their outside partners have the ability to run strong campaigns. I do not think you can buy elections the way that you used to. I think it is much, much harder to make the case that simply outspending your opponent will guarantee an outcome. And I think especially in this election, where Democrats and Democratic voters will ready to crawl over broken glass to vote, and their job is going to be convince Republican voters that, Trump's not on the ballot. You may not love the economy right now. You're sort of souring on this, but still show up. It's just a much harder case to make. I don't know if there's enough money that can sell a shitty product.
Right.
I would
Go
add,
ahead.
too, that voters are a lot more skeptical of information that we're feeding them these days with
They
the
are.
rise of AI and information coming on social media. They want to know who is responsible for the message and why they're spending all of this money on political ads. And we hear that so often in focus groups when we test messages, when we test ads, when we test content. Who's responsible for this? What's their angle? And so I think voters are a lot more skeptical when they look at the amount of money that's being spent in politics now.
Absolutely. So a lot more progressive candidates are campaigning on the message abolish ICE. A poll in March showed about half voters support the idea. I think it's higher now. And we just saw 2 more fatal shootings this month. It looks like it's animating a lot of voters. Is that the case? And Roshni, you first. What are your surveys revealed about ICE enforcement as a vehicle? And then Amanda and Adam, please weigh in.
I think voters hold a very nuanced view on this, actually, in the same way that they do around the slogan defund the police. They very much are supportive of having some sort of immigration enforcement mechanism in the country, but they are very, very unsupportive of the actions that Trump's ICE is taking in murdering Americans and forcing people into camps and kicking people out of the country. They do not like the way that ICE is operating. I think this is especially true among Latino communities right now, and why he's losing so much ground that he gained in the last election among Latino communities. They are seeing their neighbors and their friends and family being targeted. And so voters do hold a nuanced view in this, and I think running on the idea of abolishing or reforming ICE is a popular position for candidates now.
Amanda?
I totally agree. I also think this is one of those places where the Democratic Party leadership's failure to show sufficient anger really matters. Like Chris Van Hollen traveling to El Salvador and like putting his body on the line, or even Brad Lander doing the same in New York. Some of it is performative, but voters want to see that you're validating their feelings, that this is an atrocity, that this is horrific, that I should not be able to murder people in the streets. I also think the flip is also true, which is that voters have seen now over the last 18 months, totally ordinary people stand up against ICE in a way that I think is deeply inspiring and in some ways restores some faith in the American people and in this idea that like you can be responsible for your neighbor, that while our elites and our billionaires have been deeply cowardly, ordinary Americans have been incredibly brave. So watching our leadership fail gives them an opportunity to rise.
Adam?
Yeah, I think we did a poll at Searchlight at the height of after the shooting in Minnesota, and what it showed 2 things. One was that ICE was unpopular, and that the other was that people still wanted interior enforcement of our immigration laws, right? And so however you message it, you have to make clear. And what people are saying is, not like this, right? They want interior enforcement, but they're horrified, rightly so, by what they're seeing. So they want enforcement that abides by the rule of the law, that treats people humanely, that isn't pulling people out of cars and certainly isn't shooting them in the head, for just trying to get out of the way. So I think that's the line that Democrats have to walk, where, they should absolutely be harsh in their criticism of these atrocities that we're seeing and this incredibly reckless approach to interior enforcement, while still making clear that we are a nation of laws and we do need interior enforcement of our immigration laws. It just has to be humane and it has to abide by the rule of law.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think it's a communications issue. There was a really interesting video, some guy going on about what happened in Maine, a Mainer. And he's like, well, if it was in this country legally, he's in trouble, da-da. And then the guy was like, well, he was in this country legally. And he goes, oh. And he goes, and he was just trying to leave. Oh. And he had all his papers right. Oh. And it was so interesting to watch in real time this guy who was very loudmouth shift rather quickly. And it wasn't... He was actually shifting. It was an interesting moment to watch.
Real-time persuasion, It's amazing to see. Yeah.
It was funny to watch. Support for this show comes from Whatnot. When you want something, you have to work for it. Nothing in life comes easy. And the same can be said when you want to turn a side hustle into a lasting business. So why not get started with Whatnot? Whatnot is the largest dedicated live shopping platform. Whether it's beauty, collectibles, electronics, luxury fashion, even cookies, sellers are building real, thriving businesses. Anyone can sell, whether your business is big, small, or yet to exist. According to their data across Whatnot, a number of sellers making over $1 million a year has doubled. And people selling on Whatnot sell 10 times more than on other major marketplaces. That's because you're not just listing products, you're building real connections with buyers. When one of our producers tried Whatnot as a buyer, she was surprised about how much she liked their live stream buying process. The chat rooms and the real-time reaction from sellers made the whole thing kind of thrilling. Whatnot has found that buyers spend more than an hour a day in the app, and that time is spent more than just browsing. They're engaging, buying, building community, and coming back. As a seller, you go live, show off the products in real time, and turn what you love into real income. Search Whatnot, WHATNOT, in the App Store, download, and you can start selling right away. I have two more questions. You all talked about the need to prioritize winning over ideological purity. Presumably, that's the goal. But some of these progressive candidates, as they're pivoting to the general, how can they appeal to the broader electorate without compromising so much that makes them genuine, especially in purple states and districts? I'm thinking of Mamdani, who just relentlessly focused on the economy. I'd love each of you to answer. Then I have one final question.
I think keeping it focused on the problems you want to solve and speaking from a place of values, understanding that if you are clear about what your goal is, there's a lot of different ways to get at that goal. And that's kind of what the policy conversation is about, is we can all agree that everyone should have access to affordable health care. What are the different ways we can get there? And when candidates have a strong sense of values and of what they believe, the conversation about tactics and how you communicate that is much easier. I think candidates get screwed, and we see them fail at this when their campaign or themselves have to spend time figuring out what is it I believe, as opposed to how do I communicate what I believe.
Right. That's fair. Adam?
Yeah, I think part of being authentic is saying what you believe, and most people don't hold ideas that are consistent with an ideology on every single topic, right? And so, liberals are going to have mostly liberal views, and that's great, and that's what the role we play in this system. But they probably have a few things that they believe personally that does diverge a little bit from sort of leftist purity tests, and they should just say that too, right? So that's part of what being authentic means, is saying all the things you believe out loud, and that's the right balance for a general election where you're mostly going to agree with the left, but on a few things you're going to have an independent point of view, and that is authentic because it's what you believe. And it also demonstrates to general election voters and swing voters who might have voted for Trump last time that you're going to be someone who thinks for themselves and who's going to be guided by your own core values and commitments, not by a rigid ideology.
And I also think outreach for candidates is paramount, making sure that they are speaking to voters where they are, addressing the issues that are important to them, and coming in at the level that they understand those issues. I mean, for example, Mamdani in New York, AAPI voters had been voting more and more Republican over the course of the last few years. And Mamdani in the general election drove AAPI turnout higher than it has been in New York City in years, and actually got 87% of the South Asian vote in New York City, which is much more than Democratic candidates have been getting over the last few years. So having an authentic candidate, and then having a candidate that is willing to go into their communities and authentically speak to their issues and problem solve with them, it is the key there.
Yeah. I had suggested that to a presidential candidate. I'm like, go where they are, not where you are. Like, they were in Nantucket, and I was like, leave Nantucket immediately. So, last question: as we head into the 2028 presidential election, the eventual Democratic nominee is going to have to appeal to both sides of this divide and the broader electorate to win back the White House. Is this the start of a serious alignment for the party, or just another cyclical swing to the left that could prove politically costly, like it was for Vice President Kamala Harris in 2024?
I think this is an opportunity to build a lasting realignment and dominate not just the next election, but the next generation for Democrats. And I think it requires us to make some smart choices starting now with the midterms and going into 2028. I have this book coming out called Supermajority, and the idea is that this is what we need to think. We need to think about how to build a supermajority and reject these narrow majorities that we've been trapped in for the last 10 years or so. And, that means thinking about how to win in places like Nebraska and Texas and Ohio and the Dakotas, where Democrats used to hold Senate seats. And, if we make the choices we need to do that, we can build durable power that's not just going to swing back and forth, because you can't, everybody here wants to pass big, ambitious change, but you really can't do it on narrow majorities. I'd be the first to say we should eliminate the filibuster in the Senate. My first book was about that. We should definitely get rid of it, but you're going to need large Senate majorities to pass big, ambitious bills, to reshape the courts, which are going to strike down anything we pass if we don't reshape them anyway, right? So we need to be smart and thoughtful about this and say, look, we will accept divergence from purity test, especially in purple and red states, because it's the cost benefit is a no-brainer. And we need to be smart and strategic starting now with these midterms, but taking that mindset forward into 2028 as we think about how to beat Republicans and win back the White House.
Roshni?
At a base level, the Democratic Party brand is wildly unpopular right now. So it is ripe for realignment and to start from the beginning. And all of the populist and progressive policies that we've been discussing over the last hour are wildly popular, not only with progressives, self proclaimed progressives, but also with moderates and independents and even some right leaning voters. And so to build that big tent back for the Democratic Party, I think it is time for that realignment.
And Amanda?
I don't know if any of your listeners are romance novel readers, but there's a
I am.
trope in romance novels about, the looks like a cinnamon roll but could actually kill you, of like the nice guy with like so look a little bit mean. I think that's where the Democratic Party is going, in the
Yeah.
sense that I
Oh.
suspect after this cycle, we are going to be looking for a national leader who is both like kind and earnest and optimistic and imagines a world that is better, but also tough on accountability and is not going to mess around with holding Trump and the Republican Party accountable for what has been done. And the winning candidate, the sort of winning part of the party that can combine those two things, is going to be the part that moves us forward.
All right, then I can't resist. Who's your cinnamon roll? And who is Adam and who is yours, Roshni?
Oh, I think Ossoff has certainly got it. I think
Yeah.
AOC's got it if she wants it. I think Warnock, low-key, is a sleeper. He's got it if he wants it. There's lots of variations of cinnamon rolls with a little bit of could actually kill you underneath.
Adam?
I'm shaking my head because those are literally the three that I would name. I mean, I think all of them are interesting. I would also add, I would not be shocked if there's a total outsider candidate who takes us all by surprise and swoops in with that outsider energy, given how much passion there is for that right now.
Anyone you can think of?
Someone like Mark Cuban from the who has a business background, but deeply held
He's not
liberal
running,
principles.
just so you know. We talk
Okay,
about
well,
it every 3
Hey,
days.
that's news. I thought I saw Matthew McConaughey. This is me just sort of fantasizing, but I saw Matthew McConaughey, getting in on the action a little bit with the 250th anniversary. He's shown an interest in politics occasionally.
Yes. Can I give you some advice? Go listen to my interview with him, and then you'll change your mind.
Okay, I'll do that right after this. Well, but someone like that, I think, who's sort of, comfortable in their own skin, good on social media, but has a commitment to
handsome man.
American values and wants to do more. We'll see.
Yeah, Roshni, you finish.
I mean, I very much agree with the list of those three. And I think those are the three names that we hear voters bring up most often in focus groups as well. When we ask, who are candidates who are working for you right now, we hear those three names pop up a lot.
All right. Well, there's a lot of Georgia in there, a lot of cinnamon rolls from Georgia. All right. Thank you three all so much, Adam, Amanda, and Roshni, for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Today's show was produced by Michelle Alloy, Catherine Millsop, Madeline LaPlante Doobie, Megan Burney, and Kaylin Lynch. Nishat Kurwa is Vox Media's executive producer of podcasts. Special thanks to Eamon Whalen, Dave Shaw, Corinne Ruff, and Julia Sharp-Levine. And our theme music is by Trackademics. If you're already following the show, you are not a witch. Or maybe you are. If not, you're part of the establishment and you need to go. Thanks for watching. See you on Thursday.